Welcome back to March Madness. I'm Nerf Tarkenton.
And I'm Dan Risdell.
And we are here watching these amazing competitors go head to head. Dan, what has been the best part of this tournament so far?
Definitely when all the people play the sports games and some of them make points more than the other players, and that's what makes them win.
That's a very valid point. That's you pay big bucks is because you come up with things like that. I didn't see that happening. I was thrown off by them all taking off their shirts and getting in fist fights, but that was awesome. So we are going to. Oh, sorry, I got thrown off. Gosh, someone tries to call me while I'm in middle character, and it just completely derails everything. I can't work under these conditions. I'm going to be in my trailer. I forgot.
That was beautiful.
Welcome, guys, to TV Guys. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And we have a special guest.
My name's Mike.
There we go. To be fair, usually with our guests, we're like, just so you know, this is what we're doing. I'm Matt, I'm Brian, I'm guest. And we didn't do that with Mike. We left him out to dry. So
nope. And Matt told me at the last minute to come up with a fake name.
You pulled out a real name, but that's all right. Dan, I hope you're listening because you got a shout out. You're special.
I thought there's a good chance he was. That's why I picked his name.
Yeah, this is going to be a good episode. I'm really excited about this episode, and I'd love to just make more jokes and goof around, but we actually have a lot that we're getting through. So this week, what we're doing is we are pitting 32 protagonists against each other, 32 TV show protagonists. So each of us, Brian, Mike, and myself, all picked 10, and then we grabbed two other ones to fill it out to 32. And we have compiled them together in a bracket, and they're going to go head to head. And so before we jump into it, why don't we give real quickly, what is going to be your criteria for deciding a winner? Mike, why don't you go first?
I'm looking at uniqueness of the character, and I mean, probably not going to judge them fairly. I've learned that from Brian, is you can make up the rules as you go. And,
absolutely can.
I love unique characters. I love likable characters. I dislike arrogant characters, and most protagonists end up being pretty arrogant. So I'm going to be pretty negative, I think.
True story. For me, I definitely am putting rootability as the highest factor, and especially with morality. But I do understand that puts our anti-heroes at a disadvantage. So I also threw in a subcategory that I'm going to have like their charm and charisma, and then a couple of other unknown factors that, partially gut feeling and partially just some other things you tie in. And then Brian, is yours just whatever you want?
Well, it's not, I don't have a specific system like you guys do, but like, it's basically going to be like, do I like this character? So sometimes I'll have to disassociate, like, I like this show, but not necessarily this character. Like we did a whole episode about shows where the main character is not that great. So there's going to be some of those too. It's just basically like, which of these characters would I rather watch? Which of these characters do I root for? Kind of like you said. So it's a little fluid, but it's kind of, that's where I'm coming from.
That's a great point. You're absolutely right with characters on shows not being the best of the characters. There's a number of them I can think of that I feel that way about. So when I put all these in the system, I had it just randomly assigned like seed numbers. Not that matters anything, but just for a fun little note, the computer decided that the number one seed, the guy to beat, is Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And in last place, the 32 seed, barely made it into the playoffs, is Hawkeye from MASH. So let's start with that mashup. Peralta versus Hawkeye. Brian, what do you think?
Well, okay. Partially this is balanced because I haven't seen hardly any of MASH. I know that's offensive to Mike, who is a big MASH fan. But I'm going to have to go with Jake because we recently talked about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I recently watched the show. And he has that perfect balance of, like, in some ways he's so like irresponsible and annoying, but when it comes to his job and like the people he cares about, he actually does step up consistently, and it makes it like where he otherwise might not be rootable, but it makes him very rootable. So I'm going to go with Jake.
You just described Hawkeye, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
describing
very similar characters. I feel like Matt is the vote to win here. So I'm going to argue that Hawkeye has a lot of the same characteristics that Jake Peralta does. But one of the big differences with Hawkeye is that Hawkeye does sad much better than Jake Peralta, and that Hawkeye lives more extreme between the joys of life and the tragedies of life.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Jake doesn't do sad very well.
You're right. And Hawkeye also has deeper feelings that you see. He's very, very opinionated, especially on how he feels about the Vietnamese War that he's in the middle of. And so he does step up for the people that have died and the people that can't stand up for that themselves. And he has a number of moments where he's like, what are we even doing here? This isn't worth these lives that are being lost. And so I have to give Hawkeye the win because of that. Jake is a great character, but with equal skill sets, Hawkeye wins because of the emotional factor.
Well, and fun little tidbit, Hawkeye was originally supposed to be the co-star of the show along with Trapper, and Hawkeye just outshone Trapper so much thanks to the performance of Alan Alda and how strong the character is that he quickly became the star of the show.
Yeah. Alan Alda's amazing acting, and that you're absolutely right. All right, let's jump to this is a weird one. We've got Captain Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation versus Lorelai Gilmore from Gilmore Girls. I don't know if polar opposites, but it's very, very different. Mike, why don't you start us off here?
Captain Picard is the character that you don't always know what exactly he's thinking, but you do know that he's going to do the right thing, and you do know that he is an absolute leader of men, which wasn't fun, buzzy sports term there, since we're doing a March Madness theme thing. He is the character that you trust is going to have the ethical decision and really sets up a whole future characterization of how leaders are treated in television programs. Picard is kind of the archetype for a strong, independent leader.
Mm-hmm.
It's good. What do you think, Brian?
This might be an easy one, because even though I love Gilmore Girls, and I think that a Gilmore Girls episode of this podcast might be inevitable, despite Matt's not knowing it very much. However, Lorelai is not my favorite character by a long shot. Neither of the Gilmore Girls, I think, are like the shining light of that show. I think there are several other characters of that show, if it were a different kind of list, who would make it way farther into this list. But I'm just never been a huge fan of Lorelai as a character. So even though I've seen very little Star Trek, I would be willing to give it to Captain Picard over Lorelai.
Well, Picard, you're going to Hollywood.
What is your favorite character
from Gilmore Girls?
Mine is Lorelai, so I'm surprised to hear yours isn't.
No, mine is not. Mine is probably either Luke or Kirk.
In the few episodes I've seen, I also am a Luke guy. Luke is like the only thing that when I'm watching, I'm like, I don't want to rip my hair out right now.
Yeah, I love the episodes that focus more on the townies of Stars Hollow, and Luke being the more grounded character. He's definitely the more rootable, and he also had the actor who plays Luke, Scott Patterson. He has a podcast where he's going through the show now himself.
I also like, is it Richard, Luke's Lorelai's father?
Yeah, I like him too. He has moments where he's just as manipulative as Emily, but for the most part, he's much more even keeled and relatable.
Yeah. For me, Picard he's that bastion of morality, like Mike was saying, that, Star Trek universe exists as a utopia on Earth. There is still conflict outside of Earth, but all these people are like people that have been raised right. And for him to be elevated to this position of captain with all of these other people that have really good personalities and are great scientists and all that, for him to be in that position and consistently make really hard decisions, but decisions that benefit his crew, even in the middle of that, he's going to be a character to beat for me. I don't know. I think he's going to make it a long way.
Yeah. That's Patrick Stewart, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. See, I know things.
You know things.
Yeah. Another just amazing actor.
Yes. Another weird combination here we've got. Next one is Jack Pearson from This Is Us versus Loki from Loki. Now, when I was putting this list together, one of my submissions was Loki. And so I was going to say Jack, but Loki is so cool. He's like, for the longest time in Marvel, he was the only Marvel villain that you're like, I really wanted to see a ton of this guy. And then you got to flesh out his character in Loki, and you got to see another side of him. You got to see a softer side of him. But there is still that air of like, who's he going to screw over? I kind of love that. Everyone has their own agenda sort of movie or TV show. So for me, as much as I love Jack, I think I'm picking Loki for the coolness factor.
I have conflicting thoughts, so I want to hear. I'll just play the easy route and let Mike go first.
Oh, thanks, Brian. That was so nice. I mean, I'm kind of with you as we kind of have a character that I haven't seen as much of This Is Us. I've seen some of the big episodes. I would say Jack, to me, seems at least like kind of the guy you want your daughter to marry. Whereas Loki is the guy you definitely don't want your daughter to be in the same zip code as. But at the end of the day, a TV show about Loki is far more engaging to me than a TV show about Jack.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, because with the fact of Jack being dead in the present timeline from the start, it kind of limits how much character development and growth you can do. You can only go back to flashbacks so much. And I think by this point, we've seen everything we need to see about Jack. There's really no more stories to tell. I mean, they fleshed it out a little bit more when they're like, hey, he's got a brother. And then they got, okay, what's his life with his brother? But we've already seen all that now. Whereas with Loki, even though he's also dead, we somehow managed to make him able to have more storylines in death.
That's because comic book death is fake death. Comic book death is like the Taco John's of death. Is like, it's not really what you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll give it to Loki as well, just because I think Loki, there's way more opportunity for interesting storytelling. You even see that in the newest season of This Is Us. They're gravitating more and more away from Jack. He still gets mentioned, but they're not focusing on him. I wouldn't even really call him like the lead of the show anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus, the only thing about Jack, too, that's negative is that maybe there's some rose-colored glasses because he's dead. You always view your memories of people usually to be more exaggerated. So if they're a good person, that you have a much better view of the good. You don't remember the bad nearly as much. So, that might not even be the real Jack.
Well, okay, that's not maybe the best argument because, Jack was an alcoholic and was mean to his family at times. Loki attacked New York with alien races.
But he's so cool. He was super cool when he did it. All right, fine.
He's the rare villain you want to win.
Yeah, it depends on the circumstances. I didn't want him to win against New York, but everything else, as well. Yeah. Or to kill Odin, I guess. But so here's a grouping. These two are a lot more similar. They're very similar personalities. You've got Chuck Bartowski from Chuck versus Ted Lasso from Ted Lasso. What do you think, Brian?
I might have to give it to Ted Lasso just by a little bit. Just a little bit I've seen of Ted Lasso. He just seems so much like, I don't know, it's like so much more put together and more like he knows who he is and like he's got his morals and his how he's going to live his life all set up. Whereas Chuck, I mean, granted, he's thrown into this spy world out of like a fluke, but he goes through so much more insecurity throughout the seasons.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think, Mike?
I'm very surprised. I did not know Brian had started Ted Lasso. I actually told my wife before we started this, who has known Brian since he was born, that Brian had not seen Ted Lasso, and she said she was deeply ashamed of him. So just throwing that out there, Brian. If someone who's known you since birth is ashamed that you haven't seen Ted Lasso, so I'm glad that she will have a little bit of faith now in you, knowing that you have seen some Ted.
I didn't know it was possible to disappoint Monica.
I'm also deeply ashamed
of shot at me, Brian,
for completely different reasons.
What?
Is that a shot at me?
Maybe.
That's funny. All right, Mike, did you say? Oh, you didn't actually make a pick.
No.
Oh, it's Ted. It's Ted by a landslide for me. Both are very similar characters, but Ted it takes it to a new level of that type of happy-go-lucky character.
Yeah. My wife, when I told her about this pairing, because I didn't really go through everything, but I told her about this one because I'm like, that's going to be a hard one for me because they are both great characters. But she's like, oh, Ted, because he makes so many people around him better. Chuck did the same thing. He definitely does make the people in his life better and definitely does care about the people in his life. But Brian, you hit the nail on the head. He has a lot of insecurity. And as great as he is, that does hold him back. And it does stop him from truly communicating what he needs to communicate in order to avoid a lot of conflict in his life. Ted's not afraid of having hard conversations. He's not afraid of people having a lot of critiques against him, and he's also willing to admit when he's wrong about things as well. And so Ted gets a lot of kudos from me on that, and he does win. So that's another. We're doing like unanimous left and right here. The only one was Hawkeye that we didn't have unanimous vote on.
I think maybe when we get to the next round, when some of these that we unanimously picked have to go against each other, that'll be interesting.
Yep. Here's a good one. These are both fan favorites. I don't know if we'll be unanimous in this. We got Eleanor Shellstrop from The Good Place versus JD from Scrubs. I love both of these guys. I loved Eleanor's arc, but I like JD's silliness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'm picking someone to root for, I'm picking Eleanor, but I think I'm giving JD the win because I'm more intrigued by his character. His character holds things together a little better than Eleanor does. So by a narrow margin, I'm putting JD down.
I'll be the other camp, and then Mike will have to be the tiebreaker. I'm going to give it to Eleanor because Eleanor went on way more of like a journey because, Eleanor in the beginning versus Eleanor at the end, like completely different in terms of being rootable and likable and having everything. And it's just such an interesting journey to go on for all the characters, but really primarily for Eleanor, which, I mean, yes, JD changed a lot too over the course of Scrubs. And and I wouldn't be mad if he goes forward, but he kind of always started from the very beginning as like, he wants to be a doctor and help people, and like that all changed. I mean, that never changed. His like ability, his competency, his social life, all of that grows, but the sense of who he was remained consistent through all of the seasons.
Yeah. And even when he grows up, he still has a lot of immaturity, and it just becomes more endearing as he matures emotionally. But
yeah, he has immaturity throughout all of it, but he loses insecurity throughout the show. He gets more. He owns his immaturity way more.
Yeah. What do you think, Mike?
I loved Brian's argument, but I'm still going to go with JD. And it has very little to do with JD and a whole bunch to come up with the next matchup. And my main complaint about one of those people.
Playing the long game. All right.
The next matchup we've got is Oliver Queen from Arrow versus Ted Mosby from How I Met Your Mother. So I'm just gonna pencil in Oliver right here. Right.
The best argument you can make in favor of Oliver Queen is saying Ted Mosby. Ted Mosby is a character that is forever stuck in that 5 seconds that he looks up at the bar and sees Robin Scherbatsky. And the character fake grows and the character pretends to change, but the character never changes from that 5 seconds. Whereas in a lot of ways, he kind of reminds me of a young JD who does grow up and change, hence why I voted for JD in the previous matchup. Mm-hmm. But I don't even think we need to go into Oliver Queen right now. Ted Mosby is just a poorly written character.
But I do love the gag. Is one gag. It's not enough to make him win. I love the gag where Ted goes, when I get drunk, I'm super good at beatboxing. And then it's like, no, that's just in your head. And it like shows what he thinks his beatboxing is versus what his actual beatboxing is. It was such a dumb joke, but I loved it.
I'll give Ted credit. I'm still saying Oliver Queen, but I'll give Ted credit because I know we've got one Ted Mosby fan. just one, no one else. There's none in the world. But I'll give him credit that the style of the show, it wouldn't exist without Ted and his narration and the whole idea of this is where I was at this point in my life. The pitch meeting for How I Met Your Mother is super strong, and that doesn't happen without Ted. So I will give him credit for that. But as you said, Mike, 100%, he is stuck in that moment because I think also the writers were stuck in that moment. They wrote them in when they're like, let's also film this ending way back in season 1. And they're like, how much can we let him change? Because he still has to end up there. Yeah. And that was a complete disservice to the character. But that doesn't mean he gets a pass. So Oliver
Well,
pointed it.
I've been watching How I Met Your Father.
So have I.
And
Yeah.
I think it just points out how much they didn't allow Ted Mosby to grow by what they're doing with Hilary Duff's character.
I think that How I Met Your Father is like I think you mentioned this before, kind of like the spiritual successor to what would have been the Lizzie McGuire reboot, because that got shuffled down because they couldn't argue on it being family friendly versus like realistic. And I think this is kind of we're seeing what Hilary Duff wanted the Lizzie McGuire reboot to be like with this show.
Yeah. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. there's the silence now. I'm like, oh, now is when I say something. Yes, I agree. All right, we'll move on. We've got Phil Tandy Miller from Last Man on Earth, not to be confused with Last Man Standing, which so many people make that comment, versus a weird pick, Fred Flintstone. Strange matchup, but Tandy Miller versus Fred Flintstone. So, what do you think, Mike?
Last Man on Earth versus First Man on Earth?
Hey, there you go.
Nice. I think in a lot of ways this is a funny one too because we have two very similar characters. I mean, obviously you go with the fact that Tandy kind of looks like a caveman for part of the show, but they're also these very toxic masculinity macho men that end up kind of being really reliant on everybody else. I feel bad for Last Man on Earth because I wish it would have got at least one more season because it ended in a weird spot. However, my 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth asked me to vote for Fred Flintstone, and you can't turn down a cute 5-year-old.
That's true.
So I'm gonna have to vote for Fred, even though I would probably pick Tandy if it was up to me. But it's not.
What do you think, Brian?
I don't know. See, this one I've seen very little of Last Man on Earth. And what I've watched, I thought was funny just because Will Forte is a really funny guy.
Yes.
But it depends. Like we're talking about the TV shows. We're talking about the animated Fred Flintstone, which takes away the John Goodman factor, which is I think the best version of Fred Flintstone in my opinion. So a lot of that is just preambling because I don't know what I'm going to pick. I don't know.
Pick Fred. Characters too. I'm picking Fred so that your vote doesn't specifically matter. But okay. I hated in the first season, I hated Tandy's character. And the writers, I think, realized that because I think they got a lot of pushback about his character. And they're like, ooh, we leaned too hard into this aspect of him.
He got the Michael Scott treatment.
He did, absolutely. So he was a better character after season 1, but he just really annoyed me a lot. And so I took him off.
He was too selfish at the beginning.
Yes. Yeah. And they're like, this can't be what the show's about. So they did pivot well. I never ended up finishing it, but I made it about like 3 seasons in, and I guess lost interest, I suppose.
Well, we watched it during the pandemic, which seemed very fitting.
That I suppose, yeah. Last Man on Earth. Did you, just for posterity's sake, did you come up with an answer, Brian, or?
Just to be different, I will go with Phil.
You jerk. How could you? Just kidding. All right. Another weird matchup here. We've got Saul Goodman from Better Call Saul versus Jessica Day from New Girl.
Very different characters.
Very different characters. Jessica will give you the shirt off her back. She will like help you out as much as she can. Cares about her fellow man so much. And then Jimmy's just like, I'm going to survive anything. I'm a cockroach. We saw that in like Breaking Bad universe, that he's like I will survive no matter what it takes. And we're seeing how he becomes that in Better Call Saul. I think Saul is such a dynamic character, even if he makes Saul rootable in Breaking Bad. Jimmy in Better Call Saul makes Saul rootable, and you feel even more bad for what he becomes in the course of this show. But it's so thrilling to watch. Whereas Jessica, she's a good character, but still, she's like the 4th funniest character on the show, and so I gotta put Saul.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing with Saul. Like he would also give you the shirt off his back, but only if it served his interests.
Yep.
And we're signing, he is like that cockroach who will do anything to survive. But in the background, I feel like if he had gotten more like acceptance and like from specifically his brother Chuck, he may have not been that way. I feel like he was pushed to be like that way and made those choices because of how he kept getting derailed by his family who could not accept him, that he was actually changing. And then he's like, well, I guess I'm not then.
Yep.
And I will say the same thing. You watch New Girl. Okay. I'm not trying to make this sound like, people always say, oh, women can't be funny. Women can be funny, and Zooey Deschanel is funny. But on that show, the guys are way funnier than the women in that show. That's a specific show, not a commentary on women in comedy in general. So don't send me your hate mail.
Yes, send him your hate mail. Brian is absolutely saying that. No.
So, I suppose now I'm making Mike's vote irrelevant, but I'm also going to go with Saul. So what would you have said, Mike?
I'm kind of with Brian. Is Zooey Deschanel is not my cup of tea. She's not my favorite character on that show, and so I'd go with Saul.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, for me, it goes what? Nick, Winston, Schmidt, then Jess, then Cece. And Jess and Cece are pretty close because Cece has a lot of funny lines too. Jess isn't like void of humor, but she definitely is not as strong as those three guys.
I would swap Winston and Nick, but then I'm not sure where I put Coach in there because Coach gets annoying. But I love that scene in the pilot when Jess is crying and Coach just goes up, "Stop it."
And Coach is funny too. This is one of those shows that every character in the cast is funny, but it's just varying levels. And those three guys are like on a different tier than anyone else.
Yeah.
For me. All right, let me jump back over here. So we've got two guys that if the world was ending, you want these guys on your side. We've got Jack Bauer from 24 versus Agent Coulson from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Both of these great characters, very similar in terms and purpose, that is, but different personalities. Mike, what do you think?
I figure this is one where you guys are going to have to fight over me because this seems like I think I know which one both of you are going to say. And so I'm kind of excited for you guys to fight over me like a piece of delicious meat.
Okay.
I feel very weird now all of a sudden.
Thank you.
So Jack is super awesome. He's the Jason Bourne of TV. He's the Liam Neeson of television. He's like, no matter what's coming at him, he's going to make it work and he's going to turn it around and he's going to kick butt. Coulson has the same thing, but he does it with like this cool, calm demeanor the entire time. Jack gets really intense and Coulson just has like these one-liners. He has a great team around him. He's an amazing leader. He's able to really inspire the people. Whereas from the little that I've seen of 24, Jack does have a team, but it's 90% Jack. Coulson is able to inspire the people. I got to go with Coulson on this.
I think Mike's absolutely right because I love Coulson, but I'm going to have to go with Jack as well. Or Jack, just like I'm going to have to go with Jack Bauer. I was such a big fan of 24 seasons 1 through 5. And it's such like, I don't know, in that show, it's very much like if everybody listened to Jack, the show, there would be no show, but like everything would be way more successful. And I get, he breaks the law and he does stuff that you shouldn't do and all that kind of stuff. But like, after a while, you would realize, like, no, this guy is right, like 90% of the time. Why don't we just give him a chance? But no, every season, the villains are always like, yeah, let's get everybody against Jack. Ooh, we got to hunt down Jack Bauer. And Jack's the only one who knows what's going on, and no one trusts him but Chloe. And it's just like the fact that he's able to have like both the villains and the government against him time and time again, and he still manages to succeed. He's like Saul in that being a cockroach, he can't die, but not in a selfish way. He does it because whatever the threat, there's a bomb or someone's going to get killed or something. And like so many people are alive in the 24 universe because of Jack Bauer, including Chloe.
And everyone does listen to Coulson, which is why they're successful so much of the time. But saying,
okay,
maybe it's bad leadership. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think, Mike? My argument is so good. You love it. You big.
I do like Coulson better typically, but I also feel like Coulson is less consistent than Jack. And I also liked the energy of Brian's argument. So just because I feel bad for Brian, I am going to say Jack, and hopefully Brian won't pick on me anymore.
So Jack moves on to face Fred Flintstone. May God have mercy on his soul.
See, that's what I bring. I bring pity and good energy to this podcast.
That's true. That's how we became friends, is the pity and the good energy.
I don't know if that's true. What were you pitying me in 2008?
Because you're a ginger, so.
You married a ginger.
I know. It's a thing. I feel bad for them.
You married your wife out of pity?
Wait, this better not be the video clip that you use.
Well, I think it is now.
Well, now it has to be. All right. She actually watches those clips, though. So now I don't get away with that. All right, whatever. So next one is going to be Wanda Maximoff from WandaVision versus Johnny Lawrence from Cobra Kai. Great characters.
Don't feel too bad for her just because she's a ginger.
Dude, that's why I'm voting for Wanda, because she's a ginger. I feel bad. What do you think, Brian?
I don't know. These characters have kind of very similar arcs. I don't know. I like Johnny because he's the kind of character that you don't like in any other context. If he wasn't given the focus, if we weren't seeing Johnny like at home behind the scenes, you would hate Johnny. But since you see all the crap he's going through and you see his internal struggles and yeah, he is very much non-PC and can be really rude at times. It's just because he doesn't know, but he is just trying to succeed in the world. Whereas, in Wanda, you see that she's just going through a lot of grief and, enslaves an entire town, which isn't great, but...
Way to undersell that. Oh, she's enslaved an entire town. Now, that's not the best thing you can do, but...
So despite all of that, this is probably so far the hardest matchup for me. I'm going to have to give it to Johnny Lawrence, just barely edging out Wanda because of the fact of Johnny did something. Johnny's the type of character in movies and shows that forever I always hated. And for him to be able to get me to root for him was really impressive. And just the fact of his work, kind of like we're saying with Jack versus Loki, Jack, the worst thing that Johnny did was just be a bully, which a lot of teenagers are. Whereas, like I said, Wanda enslaved an entire town and knew what she was doing. Oh. So I'm going to edge it to Johnny.
She knew what she was doing after the fact. She did it on accident first, but then she didn't try and stop it. She just dug in on it.
No, and Vision tried to say, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, shut up. You're alive. So who cares about these people?"
You shut up, Mr. Robot Man. Mike, what do you think?
I'm going to go with the opposite of Brian, just because. Why not? But mostly it's pretty arbitrary, but Brian's pointed out that she does enslave an entire town, but at the same point, you still feel bad for her at the end of the show, which makes for a fantastic character that she can be the villain that you absolutely are ready to cry for.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a really good character, but I got to go with Johnny as well. I feel like Johnny has less stuff going on versus the one. So I'm kind of looking at these characters in a vacuum where WandaVision had a lot of plot stuff happening. And there's people who are like, oh, in the first 2 episodes, I was so bored because it didn't catch it. It was slow moving. Whereas the first episodes of Cobra Kai were also slow moving, but it was really diving deep into this character. And Johnny is the type that you were right, Brian, you want to root for him because he's a guy that's down on his luck and just doesn't know how to pull himself out of this funk, even though he has a desire to, and he has an earnest want to be a contributing member of society and to help the people around him and, to do the right thing. So I got to pick Johnny. I really like him. I think he's a great character.
Daniel LaRusso, he doesn't do anything bad. He's not a villain, but he just kind of makes you want to punch him in the face.
he he does. I love how they write him because he's not a bad guy, but he can definitely be antagonistic. And then there's also the times that you definitely still want to root for him. It's really good writing on that show. All right, we got two superheroes, two defenders, even right out of Hell's Kitchen. You got Jessica Jones versus Matt Murdock, the Daredevil, and both of these from the Netflix shows. Mike, these are your babies. Which one are you picking?
Well, this one's a tough one because I like Daredevil a lot more, but Jessica is also a lot more unique. Matt Murdock is very typical of a superhero arc in many ways. He does have the whole religious aspect to the character, which is really fascinating to explore. But Jessica is so different in that she isn't a superhero and she doesn't want to be a superhero, but she has superhero powers.
Yeah.
And so if you're asking me which show I'd rather watch Matt Murdock in Daredevil. But if you ask me which character is more unique, I'm going to go with Jessica Jones. And so for this exercise, I would lean towards voting for Jessica.
All right, Brian, I'll let you split the difference because I'm going to pick Daredevil. I do like Jessica Jones. I liked the series a lot. She is a character that is she shares similarities with Wanda, where she's operating out of a place of hurt, out of this grief that she's still carrying with her and dealing with. And she has a great arc in season 1. Season 2 wasn't as good, but season 1 was just some amazing television. And I thought it was such a great allegory. But again, that's the show and not the character. Daredevil, I really love because Daredevil is in the middle of this fray and is trying to take down this either the Kingpin or the Hand, whatever season you're in. He has to go against this force that is just completely controlling the community that he loves. And there's all these people that are telling him this is the way you've got to do it. You've got Punisher telling him you got to do it this way. You've got Elektra telling him you got to do it this way. Even the priest he seeks out telling you got to do it this way. That all these influences stick also being that way. And yet he's able to still find this moral center and be like, this is my home. This is what I'm holding on to. And I've got to fight to not only save the city, but to not lose myself in the process. I love that. It's so fascinating. So Daredevil gets my vote.
This is hard for me because this is the two shows I haven't seen. So I had to look up little clips of both of these. And I love your energy, Mike, or Matt. I love your energy, Matt. But
you suck. This is the second time. Oh, your energy is great, Matt, but I'm going to go with the other guy.
Oh no, because I think Mike brings up some good points about Jessica being unique and like more interesting to watch. I will say, like, I almost picked Daredevil just because of his Spider-Man cameo, which I thought was pretty cool.
Spoiler alert!
It's been out for like 2 months now. I think we're safe on spoilers.
Yeah.
Anyone who wanted to see Spider-Man has seen Spider-Man.
True. So you're picking Jessica, you said?
Yeah.
I love that the next matchup is Jessica versus Johnny because I can totally see that interaction between them. Johnny like hitting on Jessica and then her like beating the crap out of him.
Which would probably just make him more interested.
Yes. And then like how does he fight? How would he fight a superhuman? I would be interested to see that too. That'd be a lot of fun. I just love that matchup.
Sorry to bum you out, but I think you got it wrong.
What?
It's Jack versus Johnny.
Jack's against Fred.
Jack's against Fred. Your tournament must look different than mine.
What did I miss one? I did miss one. Thank you, Mike. I missed Saul. That's why it looks different. Because Fred. Okay. I'll fix this on my side. Let me throw this next one out. You've got Michael Bluth from Arrested Development versus Leslie Knope from Parks and Rec. What do you think, Brian?
This one seems to be a slam dunk in my case for Leslie because I love the show Arrested Development, but we've even said none of the characters are really that likable. And Michael he's just so like condescending and self-righteous. And like I said, like we said when we talked about Arrested Development, yes, his family is crazy, but so is he, and he doesn't realize that. Whereas Leslie is crazy as well, but she's not condescending. Leslie is crazy, but she's so generous and giving for the people she cares about and for the entire town. Like, I don't know. It's so much easier to root for Leslie than it is to root for Michael. Leslie's not my favorite character in Parks and Rec by far, but if I'm going out of the two of those, to me, it's a slam dunk for Leslie.
Well, Leslie's aware of her faults and doesn't care what people think of her, which makes her a far more likable character.
Yeah, well, she cares in the very beginning, which is why part of the reason the early seasons aren't as good. But once she becomes the Leslie character that we think of, then you're right, she doesn't care.
So I'm with you too. I think Leslie is the obvious pick. Michael is a great straight man. He is really funny, and the way he interacts with the rest of the Bluths is so good, but it's hard for a straight man to win a contest like this. Leslie has more staying power. She's more interesting of a character, not to mention she is funnier, and she has a lot more redeeming qualities. No brainer for me too.
Yeah. Well, one thing I love about Parks and Rec is that the role of straight man versus like the crazy one is a revolving door, and any of those characters, depending on the pairing, what's going on, could fill either role.
It's a really good point too.
Mm.
All right, Mike, what do you think?
I said Leslie.
Oh, okay. Sorry. All right, then we'll move on. Again, we got two similar characters here. So we've got House from House MD versus Winger from Community. And I was saying in the chat that we had, this is one that I pointed out. It's like you've got two characters that they're the exact same, really good at what they do, using people as ends to reach their means, but one's in a drama and one's in an absurd comedy. So I still say, for me, House is going to win out because I just really think he's got a lot. Him being in a drama, but to still be funny as he is, gives him that huge boost in charisma. He's also just an amazingly genius guy. Like, Jeff can BS his way out a lot of stuff. House can also do that, but he can back it up with a lot more smarts. To say Jeff is stupid, but House is more of a genius than Jeff is. So I got to say House.
What do you think, Mike?
I'm going to go with Matt as well and say House. Jeff Winger's arrogance doesn't seem as earned to me as House's does. And Community was a show that I know both of you love it, but I thought it really had its flaws. I had to eventually give up on it. That was a show that when I saw the cast list, I was thrilled over, and it just got too strange for me over the years, and the characters didn't mature enough. And I love the actor. I'm blanking on his name right now that plays Jeff.
Joel McHale.
Joe McHale, thank you. And I love Joe McHale in other things he's been in. I just thought he was kind of played up his type too much when he was Jeff Winger.
Yeah. I'll make it unanimous for House, because the thing with Jeff is, Jeff's arc is that he starts out as completely selfish and doesn't care about anybody, and by the end he does. But it just seems like it's not a gradual thing. It's like he can have like a breakthrough and he's starting to make progress. And a couple episodes later, if the story demands it, all of a sudden now he's super selfish again. And we have to redeem him again. And he's good for a while. It's like, how many times do we have to do this like backsliding? Like, he's selfish or not, depending on what the story kind of dictates. And it just kind of pulls you out of it a little bit at times, which is why Jeff isn't my favorite character on that show.
Whereas House has varying levels of selfishness. He does try at different points to get beyond that, but he's such a self-destructive character that he never really can break free of it in any regard. So it makes sense when he is more selfish in a scene versus another one or an episode, because he just can't get out of it. And even when he starts to get out of it, he just sabotages himself, pushes everyone around him away again, and kind of starts over with that whole process. So,
yeah.
All right, let me load this up. I lost this. There we go. Here's a tough one. Tough one for me. Michael Scott from The Office versus Sheriff Hopper from Stranger Things. I think I know what Mike's is going to be, because Mike, I don't think you've even seen Stranger Things, and you're the one who threw Michael Scott in the office on here. So what do you got, Mike?
Yeah, I just think you can't not do a character list that doesn't have Michael Scott as just one of the most beloved and endearing characters, which again is just one of the credits to the character, is how he shouldn't be likable. You shouldn't care about him. You should want to throw dirty baloney at your TV screen. And still at the end of the day, when he smiles, you smile because he makes you happy. And it's just an amazing performance by Steve Carell. It's so especially after the first season, it's an incredibly well written character. And I can't go against Michael Scott.
You have me this close to convinced. I do love Michael Scott. He's so funny, and Steve Carell just is this powerhouse performance that when Michael is not there, it's the vacuum of the show. Like, there's no show without him, no matter how good everyone else is on that show. But I do love Hopper so much, and Hopper has a similar characteristic where it's like he has a lot of reasons why you wouldn't root for him. You're rooting for him because he is on like the guy that Joyce goes to right away, and he's thrust into this. But I mean, early on, he's trying to get out of doing his police work. He's like, oh, she's crazy. I'm not even going to listen to her, but he still is drawn into it. And there's multiple times in his interactions with Eleven as he's being the dad, or throughout this series, he makes a lot of mistakes and he does a lot of stupid things, but he then tries to redeem it. And David Harbour has this charisma in the role where it's, you still like him and you're still rooting for him, even when you know he's in the wrong, even when he's making these bad choices. And you know, in the third season, spoiler for the end of the third season, he's makes a sacrifice to save all of Hawkins, and Joyce included. So I think I got to put Hopper, because self-sacrifice knocks it up for me. What do you think, Brian?
It is hard because there are a lot of great things about Hopper and about Michael. But when I think about it, like the show like Protagonist, you think about like who like completely carries the show. And even though they went 2 seasons without Michael was The Office. Like Michael carried the show. The first name you think of with The Office is Michael Scott. Whereas in Stranger Things, I think, yeah, I would probably put Hopper at the top of the list, but I think at different times, Hopper, Joyce, Mike, and even Jonathan could be considered the main character of the story.
11.
And 11. Oh, yeah. Duh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Again, I don't dislike female characters. But Joyce is on my list. Okay, we're good.
Yeah, you're all right.
This would be, and it's not just because I'm sure we have a lot of listeners who maybe don't listen to Stranger Things who are like, how are you not picking Michael Scott? It's not because of you guys. I might have to give it to the edge to Michael Scott, because if you're talking about protagonists, it's just like what Mike said. He can be unlikable, but you never like are completely against Michael as a person. You're like shaking your head, and sometimes you're looking like this because you're like embarrassed for him. But I don't know, he just carries a show in a way that Hopper doesn't. So I have to give it to Michael. I know I said I would side with you eventually, Matt, and I'll try to. But
that's okay. Your argument too. I'm like, you know what? I'm okay that Michael's going forward. This is the one loss so far that I'm like, you know, I'm okay. This is completely fine.
Yeah.
That's how close they were for me. So we got next weird pairing again. Ray Barone from Everybody Loves Raymond, Sherlock from the Benedict Cumberbatch Sherlock series. I don't know how we argue these characters, but Brian, what do you got?
Oh, it's easy. Sherlock wins.
Holy cow! I didn't see that coming.
Okay, I love Everybody Loves Raymond, but Ray is just such a whiny jerk sometimes. Like, he will do anything he can to get out of his responsibilities as a husband and a father sometimes. And like, it's whenever they do his like, oh, I love my family, it just seems forced. And I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think he's very unlikable, and he's like the picture of how you shouldn't be in a marriage.
He doesn't have a good heart though. Like, you know, when he messes up and realizes, he's like, oh, you know, I got to fix it. But he does also have that side of Marie, a little bit of the manipulation too, of like, what can I get away with Deborah? And so I do see your point. He's the weakest of the main characters before Amy came on, but it doesn't mean that he's weak. He's just not he's not as amazing as all these other cast members. So I think I also have to give the edge to Sherlock, as much as I like Ray. But Sherlock, despite his flaws, he is a great protagonist because he is a mixed bag. He's like House. I mean, House is based off of Sherlock Holmes. And so because he's like House, you've got that same sort of like very intriguing to watch this guy be so good at everything except for emotional stability. What do you think, Mike?
It's Sherlock easy. I'll save my argument for a future round.
Sounds good. All right. Final one of this first round. We've got Din Djarin, the main character from The Mandalorian, versus Sean Spencer from Psych. Psych is a show I've not watched in a while. Mike, what do you think?
Well, this one's going to give me an ulcer. These are two incredibly different characters.
Yes.
In so many ways. Sean Spencer wants to be front and center. He wants to be talking nonstop. He wants to have all of the attention, which is the complete opposite of the Mandalorian.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great
so
point.
You said you haven't seen a lot of Psych. So Sean Spencer, overbearing father, grows up incredibly gifted mentally. He likes to have the attention, and he decides to get into a career as a psychic detective, just using his actual detective skills that he got from his father through the years. In a lot of ways, he does have some good arcs where he shows maturity, kind of how we talked about earlier, though, with another character, that he shows maturity by still remaining a very, very goofy, very silly character. The show itself goes down in quality. Early on, there's a lot of great mysteries, and there's a lot of growth with the characters, and over time, they just went sillier and sillier with it. A really well done character that you just love to see good things happen for, and you love to see him palling around with his best friend. You love to see his interactions with his father. But I mean, Mandalorian can communicate so much with so little.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to jump in then while you're still thinking and you're processing. I'm going to say Sean. I think Sean is really good, and he is the type of protagonist to hold a show together. Whereas Mandalorian, he is very engaging, and he is this pinnacle of morality and justice. Jeff, if you're watching, I'm so sorry that I'm not picking the Star Wars guy. He is like I will do the right thing despite how hard it is. Honor, loyalty. It's great. It's an awesome characteristic, but the Mandalorian is very plot centric, and I feel like Psych. Sean's character can get pulled out of that show and get put in another show, and again steal the show of whatever show he gets thrown into. He's just a really good character, and he has some fun quips, and I really liked him, and so I gotta give him the credit. Plus, it would be kind of fun to see Sean go up against Sherlock. I'm just gonna say that didn't really factor into my decision, but I just see that here.
This was a tough one, too, because I haven't seen a ton of Psych either. Like I said, like Matt said, or like Mike said. But
I think I made you watch several episodes, didn't I?
I think you did. And I it's one of those shows, like, I didn't stop watching it because I didn't like it. I didn't have time at the time. It's so tough. It's just a tough matchup. I think I'm going to have to go with giving it to Sean Spencer over The Mandalorian. Because I said, The Mandalorian, his character doesn't really change that much, like, because he always has his morals, his belief. The only thing he changes is letting himself build an attachment to Grogu, which normally he didn't have any attachments to, which that was a great dynamic. And I think I would probably pick the Mandalorian over a lot of people on this list. But I don't know, just like the dynamicness, kind of like a little bit of the characters we've talked about. I think that it would be interesting to see how far Sean can go.
His character change happens immediately. Like when he discovers Grogu, it's completely changed radically. And then it's becoming accustomed to this character and taking care of Grogu and then learning how to let it go. He does change, and it's a lot more subtle.
I feel like his passion for Grogu has increased over time. He would not have taken off his helmet early on for Grogu, and he does later. You see a growth in their relationship, and so now that you guys have both voted for Sean, you free me up for vote for Mandalorian because I can't not vote for the Star Wars character. So thank you both for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing: is like we even saw a lot of great stuff from the Mandalorian in the Mandalorian season 3. I mean, the Book of Boba Fett.
Yeah, I mean, he pops in and steals the show. So, I mean, that did weigh for me. I was like, ooh, that's good. That in his own show or in a completely different show, he like takes it over for 2 episodes. But
it also helps the main character of the show wasn't in those episodes.
That does help. Thank you. All right, we're in the second round. Let's just jump into it. We've got Hawkeye versus Picard. Remember, Hawkeye from MASH, not Hawkeye from Hawkeye. All right, Brian, what do you got? Hawkeye versus Picard.
It's hard for me not to vote for Patrick Stewart, so I'm going to give it to Picard.
All right, Mike, I want to go to you because I know you're going to struggle the most with this.
This one hurts.
Mike looks like he's praying.
Yeah.
Dear Lord, forgive me.
Like a stress headache at the middle of my nose. I think I will say that I got both characters change a lot. I really dislike early Hawkeye, but I love later Hawkeye so much. And I will say one of my critiques for Captain Picard is that he's not that personable a character. Like his interactions, sometimes people respect him, people admire him, but his interactions with his crew are very distanced. And so now that I've made up an excuse to criticize him, I just really want to vote for Hawkeye.
I'm going to move Picard on because he is great for Hawkeye. Since they're so close, Picard is a higher morality. I feel like again, that pinnacle, the bastion of morality and honor and loyalty. But the one thing with Hawkeye that's going to make him lose points and lose out here is that his pranks can sometimes border on bullying. And so, I know different time, and I know that, in a war, you're really struggling of holding on to humanity. And that's a thing that he and Trapper held on to together, is being able to have those things. But sometimes it almost got too mean-spirited. And so that's where I'm going to put Picard there.
And now that we've established that Brian hates women, we can also point out that Hawkeye has a bad track record with how he treats his female coworkers.
Mm-hmm. There you go. All right. So we got another weird Loki versus Ted Lasso. Now this really is as much of opposites as I can think of that we've hit on. Mike, what do you think, Loki or Ted Lasso?
I'm going to go with Ted. Something about Ted, even when he's struggling, he's so honest, he's so endearing, he's so gentle and kind. I mean, you even look at the cultural impact outside of the show. There's articles being written about how this is changing how youth coaches are talking to their players. Just such a iconic character, which is hard to say considering the show's not that old.
Yeah.
But just that level of optimism is incredibly refreshing to see, while also having so much depth.
What do you think, Brian?
I went into this thinking out this round, as Mike was talking, thinking I was going to vote for Loki. But I think I also have to give it to Ted Lasso, because I realized that my main argument that I was going to put for Loki was I loved that moment in Infinity War. And I think it's the moment when he officially becomes an Avenger, when he joins them and says, we have a Hulk, and tries to stab Thanos. And the moment that he puts his cards on the table and gets him killed. But in Loki, that never happened to him. He gets to see a little brief glimpse of that future of his, but you're realizing this is Loki circa 2012, right after that. So yes, it's the same character, and yes, to us it happened, but Loki's not coming off of that character development and that moment, which I think would have, if he was, I think I would have had to give this moment to Loki.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat of I thought I was going to vote Loki, and I'm not. Ted is a great character, and I'm surprised at how far he's going. Like how close to our hearts he's become in only 2 seasons time. Mm-hmm. And so it's really impressive. So let's jump over to JD versus Oliver Queen. I'll go ahead and start this one. For me, it's JD hands down. Very engaging protagonist. Same reasons that I picked him early on is that I just really love what he brings to the show, and getting to dive into that character's head also helps give a whole other dynamic to the show. So that is the other side of it. We don't really get to jump into Oliver's head too much. So
Oliver Queen, you start off with this massive that he's a individual that's just completely fixated on rage and on revenge, and you get to see him gradually grow into a righteous team leader, which is a much better arc for a limited series than it is for a long-running TV show. Whereas JD remains a very good protagonist throughout the entire arc. So I'm also going to go with JD.
Nice. Brian, were you the same boat?
Yeah, I kept thinking about it. Even though I voted against JD in the first round, one thing I think is great about JD, he can keep his like crazy, silly energy and all his antics with Turk and the janitor and all that. But when it comes down to it, and they play like the serious music and like the dark lighting, like it becomes a drama in those moments. And in those moments, you don't see JD as like the goofy guy. You see him as someone who's actually dealing with like a patient dying or whatever the moment is. And that's a hard line to cross, to be able to do both. Yep. A lot of people can do one or the other, and he's a character that can do both, which is impressive.
Great points. All right, let's jump over to Fred Flintstone versus Saul Goodman. A sentence you don't expect to say every single day. Mike, why don't you jump in on this one?
I'm going to go with Fred Flintstone. I don't know why, but I just going to go with Fred Flintstone.
It's the 5-year-old promise.
See, here's the thing. Fred Flintstone is a cartoon character, and I don't mean actually animated. I mean, live action people can be cartoon characters. Hello, John Ralphio. But I think that there's only so much he can do to be an actual character. Whereas Saul Goodman or Jimmy McGill, whichever one you want to call him, he is an actual character. He's got stuff going on. And it's not going to be as simple as, hey, I'm goofy, yabba dabba do. So to me, Brian, it's a no-brainer. Sorry.
Would this change for you if it was John Goodman versus Saul Goodman?
Oh,
it might. I've said on this podcast before, I am a John Goodman fan. I like pretty much anything he's in. Most of his good stuff is on movies, though, aside from Roseanne and the Connors. But yeah, that would make a difference.
I'm so glad you pointed that out. John Goodman, Saul Goodman, love it. I too am Saul, just such a rich, dynamic character. I'm sure I'll need to back him up more next time. I don't know if I'm voting him over JD, but I love Saul. He's so engaging to watch. All right, Jack Bauer versus Johnny Lawrence. This is an odd choice. What do you think, Brian?
Oh, you started with me. This is tough.
That's why I started with you. Yeah. Not going to give you a chance to think.
Well, I'm still going to think.
Nope, you don't get to.
I have to give it to Jack Bauer. I love Johnny Lawrence, and maybe Johnny Lawrence has more character development, but Jack Bauer is just so dynamic and like everything, like you know that he's going to survive, but he's still like, it's very hard not to be on the edge of your seat when like they're not going to kill Jack. He's the main character. He's like the one character that can't die, but you're still like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? Like, I don't know. I have to give it to Jack.
You know, I thought I was going to say Johnny. When I called on you, I thought I was going to say Johnny, and I'm saying Jack too. Even though I've only watched one season of 24 and I love Cobra Kai, I love Johnny so much, but when push comes to shove, Jack is that action hero star of like, we've got to make this happen. You're so engaged in what he's doing. It's like, how far is he going to go to make sure that these nukes don't go off or that this person gets captured, and like all the things that he sacrifices. I know some of the big points that he hits, all the things that he has to sacrifice and all the choices he has to make, they're really good television. And so I do have to give the win to Jack. Would you?
I'll acknowledge up front, this is probably a bad take. But to me, both of these characters don't elevate their show that much. So I'll go with Jack with you guys because I don't feel that strongly on it.
Wow. All right.
We'll say on 24, I think the character that elevates it the most is President Palmer, but he's not the main character.
Well, he makes sure that the nation is in good hands.
That's true.
All right. So Jessica Jones, Leslie Knope. Brian hates us around. He's not for a man, but all right. I'll go. For me, it's Leslie. I voted Daredevil over Jessica. Jessica's not a bad character, but Leslie is so easy to root for. She's so easy. Like the fact that she gets Ron in her corner so much, despite how different they are, and despite how much she even annoys him too. That points to the credibility of Leslie Knope. She and April, like characters like that. They're these characters that they don't care about anything else, but they care about Leslie. It's hard to say anything against her, so she's my pick.
Yeah, for everything that Matt just said, I pick Leslie as well.
Mike?
I was pretty torn, but I think Matt convinced me. I'll go with Leslie.
Yes.
Even though I do think it's funny, the super happy character versus the super sad character.
It's like that one meme picture where there's like those two girls in the car and one's like the goth and one's got like the rainbow hair and everything. That's this one.
Leslie, or it's just April and Andy.
I mean, that too. This is fun, though. I love this. We've got House versus Michael Scott. Michael freaking Scott, as Kevin calls him. I don't know if I've gone first recently. No, I went first just then. Brian, how about you?
I got to give it to Michael Scott. I know House is a great character, and maybe it's just bias, but I don't know. It's just, like you said, Michael's not even my favorite character of The Office. I wouldn't have put him at the top of our Office ranking one, but I just think there's so much. The heart of the show comes from Michael, and I think there's a handful of characters who make The Office as successful as it is, and Michael is obviously one of those.
Mike, I think you're going to agree, right? Are you saying Michael too?
I am. I mean, they're both great characters for their show, but as far as which one do I like, it's Michael Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I love House. He makes very interesting television. But so does Michael Scott. Michael Scott is fantastic. So that is my vote. So we've got now the two detectives, Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch versus Sean Spencer. Mike, why don't you start us off here?
I'm going to go with Sherlock. Sean Spencer is more overtly funny, but Sherlock has a great dry sense of humor. They're both detectives. They actually both shows use the highlighting kind of thing to show like what kind of hints and clues that they're picking up. So in a lot of ways, they're very similar, but also very different characters. I mean, obviously, Sean Spencer is partially based off of Sherlock. The fact of that you never quite know what is going on in Sherlock's mind makes for much more engaging television. You can't quite turn around because you're not sure what Sean will say next, but you don't know where Sherlock is going next that's going to advance the plot. Whereas a lot of Sean's can't miss moments normally have very, very little to do with the story of the episode.
Brian, what do you think?
I'll agree with that. I think Sherlock is just such a dynamic character. I don't think I ever actually finished all of Sherlock, but I've seen most of it, so don't hate me. Okay. So I've seen the best of Sherlock, apparently.
There you go.
And like you said, it's another one of those characters that kind of like Johnny Lawrence, where I don't like this type of person in real life, and I don't like most of these types of characters, but I still root for them. And that to me is a mark of a good character. If that type of character can make me root for them, it's saying something.
Yeah. Sean Spencer's Diet Sherlock. And so the only thing that really separates these two characters is just demeanor, and Sean's funnier. And funnier isn't always enough to be the winner. And so I do pick Sherlock. He is smarter than Sean, even though they have the same skill set. And so he also has very dynamic television. All right, we are in the not the final four, the final four matches. We're in the semifinal, quarterfinals?
Elite Eight.
Elite Eight. Thank you. We're in the Elite Eight. That's where we're starting from. I didn't struggle with anything else before we said that. All right, we're in the Elite Eight. So we've got Picard versus Ted Lasso. Tough choice, tough matchup. When I started this whole thing, I thought Picard was going to go all the way. Oh man, it is tough. They are both like that. The guy you want behind the helm, the guy you want to be following. It's so easy to follow after him. I think I've got to go Ted. I think I've got to say him over Picard. It's tough. Mike, you look like you're wrestling with the exact same problem.
I'm pretty torn here. I know I voted against Picard last time, but that was really hard to do too. But there's just something about Ted that I almost like. Picard, they did the whole new series. I was so thrilled that they did it. 'Cause Patrick Stewart isn't going to be with us forever. He is getting up there in years. But season 3 of Ted has me terrified. Season 2 had me terrified that they're somehow going to ruin this character that might be one of the best TV characters of all time. Which, again, seems silly to say, but man, it's just such a great character.
Yep. So what are you landing on?
I'm going to go with Ted Lasso.
I'll go with Ted as well, and not just to get back on Monica's good side.
I figured you would, Brian. That's why I jumped over to Mike, because I thought Mike would have the hardest time here with the fate still undecided. All right. Here's one that's going to pain me. We got JD versus Saul Goodman, both characters that I love a lot. Brian, what do you got for me?
This is a tough one too, but I still have to give it to Saul Goodman. Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul are not typically the kinds of shows that I like. I typically haven't been really gravitated towards those super serious shows. But a handful of characters, Saul and Mike, for sure, Mike Ehrmantraut, are the two main characters on both the shows that really keep me engaged, keep me watching. Mm-hmm. And so, whereas on Scrubs, honestly, I watch Scrubs more for like Dr. Cox and Janitor, and Turk and the female characters, of course, and but not Elliot because she sucks. But
Jordan's pretty good.
Oh, Jordan, yes. Jordan is hilarious.
Yeah.
And turns out that's actually what she's like in real life too. But anyways.
I believe it.
Yeah. So I have to give it to Saul.
Mike, what do you got?
Bill Lawrence does great characters. I'm gonna go with JD. JD isn't in that final weird season, most of the final weird season. But you think about there's the episode where JD gets locked in the water tower, and the whole thing happens without JD. And part of you doesn't notice it, but part of you does. That there is a massive hole in that episode, that you have other people taking over the narration, but it's not the same as having JD.
Yeah.
And it's just, I gotta go with, man, Bill Lawrence knows good characters.
He does.
He absolutely does. Because, as you said, JD's not even the best character on Scrubs. He's a great character, but, I mean, there are some even better ones. I still have to say Saul. Saul is just so captivating. It's watching a train wreck. Mm-hmm. That's what Better Call Saul is you're watching this guy just make the wrong choices, and you still want to, through sheer willpower, get him to not blow himself up, because he's got this great thing going with Kim. And like, Kim is going to get either turned down with him. Like, that's what I love about this show is you're like, what are you going to do to her? What is the collateral damage going to be in her life? Is it going to be she gets turned down with you? Does she die? What's happening?
Yeah, because that's the thing is, like, there are stakes with those characters because she's not in Breaking Bad. She's not in his life. Yeah. So how does she get out of his life? Because she's so intertwined with him.
Yep.
And I
All
still
right.
haven't seen the most recent season because it wasn't on Netflix. I don't know if it still is or not.
I imagine most of the time when they do that, they usually actually drop it like right before the new season starts, which I think the new season starts in April. So I think we're going to get more, Better Call Saul on Netflix in March would be my guess.
All right. Well, I'll be watching.
There you go. All right. So we got Jack Bauer versus Leslie Knope. I'll start off on this one. Again, I'm a Knope fan. I am all for Leslie. And you know, it's not just because she's a strong female character. I'm not the type I'm like, I'm going to advance someone just because she's a female. But I do have to say that that does factor into it too in this, that she is super like awesome in a man's world. Like that is something that prevails throughout the series too. And that she is able to maintain her femininity, able to be a strong female role model. And if I'm putting Leslie versus Jack, like Leslie is able to do so much and she can accomplish so much without like she can save things in a completely different way than Jack does. I don't know if that made sense, but Leslie is a hero to me. I love her, so she's going up.
Well,
Brian, go for it. Try to convince me. You're not going to, but you can try.
Okay. Here's the thing. I have to go with Jack Bauer. And I'm going to convince you with a scene I'm going to describe because I don't know how much you've seen of 24, Mike. I don't think you've seen this.
Seasons.
Okay. So, and again, spoiler for a show that was like 15 years ago. Who cares? But longer than that. But season 5 starts out with President Palmer being assassinated. And this is a character that he and Jack have built a strong bond from like both trauma and mutual respect, and the point where like these aren't two guys that are going out to the bar and hanging out every night, but these are two guys that have immense respect for each other. And President Palmer, between seasons 4 and 5, Jack had faked his death and was one of only 4 characters during that time who knew Jack was still alive. And Jack was living under a fake name. He was living with his woman and her son, and he has to see on TV that like his close personal friend that he has this great respect for has died. And you can see him, like the sadness on his face, he's tearing up. And someone has to ask like, are you okay? And he has to play it off like, yeah, whatever. Like it's, you know, it's sad that the president died, but not like I knew him personally. And that kind of acting, both like as Kiefer Sutherland and as Jack Bauer, acting like didn't just lose one of his close friends, was such great acting and such compelling character. Like you feel for him in that moment. And that's the kind of moment I don't think that Leslie Knope could pull off.
Here's the scene, Mike. Leslie Knope walks into an extremely important meeting, and she has the flu, or it's a banquet, or no, a pitch. I don't remember what it is. She has the flu. She is barely cognizant. She says the wall and the floor switch places. Then she goes on stage and she hammers out a proposal and nails it and gets the funding she needs. And at the very end of it, then she starts to get back in the loop and Ben saves her. But she dialed in, even with everything against her. And she got this Harvest Festival off the ground and she kicked its butt. What do you think, Mike? Who wins?
So it's Leslie. So I have no problem. Thank you. It's, you know, now that we've met for the first time, Matt, I feel like I had to side with you on something. I can take both of those. So I'm making up the rules as I go. I'm just going to admit that now. But I can take both of those characters, and if you switch them out with a similar type, like, can't think of a good, like if you switch Michael Scott out with Leslie, that is not the same show. But I feel like there's a lot of other action characters from movies and TV shows that you could switch out with Jack, and 24 is still a very similar show.
That was an amazing point. Fully beyond that point. Love it. All right. So Michael Scott, he has the easiest route to the Final Four because he just faced off against House, kicked his butt. Now he's facing off against Sherlock, the same character. So can we just agree it's Michael Scott?
Yeah, it's Michael Scott.
All right.
What you gonna do, Michael Scott? Make our dreams come true.
So you just said, Mike. Let's go backwards because you just said this. Leslie Knope, if you replace her with a Michael Scott. Well, now it's Leslie Knope versus Michael Scott. We also have Ted Lasso and Saul Goodman on the other side, but Leslie Knope versus Michael Scott. Very tough. Great characters. they're both extremely watchable. They're both really fun. I still am putting Leslie because she also has this fantastic morality behind her. Michael, it's hard for him to lead. He still somehow puts up these amazing numbers at the branch. It still somehow brings out people's best, but he's not this natural leader. Leslie is. She knows how to get the best out of people intentionally. I got to put Leslie there. Brian, what do you think?
I'm going to have to give it to Michael. Everything you said is great. And I even went into this thing saying, I'm not just going to make it go to Michael Scott because I don't want him to be that obvious, because obviously this is a pro Office podcast. But, but I don't know. Michael just has that magnetism that the show without Michael was a completely different show. And I think that there's enough characters, not that they could have done, I don't think they could have done it without Leslie, but I think there's enough characters that it would have been watchable still. You still would have had Ron and Tom and all these guys, but I just think that Michael Scott is just much more of an iconic character. He's much more, I don't know, dynamic, and his flaws are more on the table, but like he owns them by not owning them, because he just has that, I don't know, I can't describe it, but it's Michael Scott for me.
All right, Mike, tie breaking. What do you got?
So I'm sorry, Brian, but you made the best point for and the best point against Michael Scott. So you had me swayed, and then you lost me, and then you kind of swayed me again. So I'm not sure where I land. But you pointed out earlier that Leslie Knope is not the best character on her own show, whereas Michael Scott, in my opinion, very clearly is the best character on his own show. We got to see The Office, well, we had to see The Office, unfortunately, without Michael Scott. We never had to see Parks and Rec without Leslie. It is very hard to imagine Parks and Rec without Leslie.
Think of her like a battery. I mean, that's really what she is for The Office. The Office of the Parks and Rec. I realize I can realize why that would be confusing.
I'm torn here. I'll probably regret this, but I'm sorry. I'm gonna go with Michael Scott.
Oh no! Didn't see it coming.
I thought you were going into this going against me.
I started there. I flipped about 6 times, and then the thing that decided it is I got it backwards, and I actually thought I was siding with Matt. So sorry.
Heaven forbid.
Matt. Yeah, sorry, Matt. Not sorry, Brian.
It's because he has red hair. You just felt bad. You joined with him. I know it. All right.
It's not a disability.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
I believe that why you hate Elliot Reed? Is because Elliot Reed doesn't like redheaded people? Is that why you dislike her, Brian?
No, it's because Sarah Chalk just plays unlikable characters in everything she does.
Or is it because she's a woman? Is that why you don't like her, Brian?
That's it. Number one. That's Mike. You just voted out the only woman left. Brian just won. All right. So correct me if I'm wrong. Brian, you have seen all of Better Call Saul, except for that last season, you said. But you've seen very little of Ted Lasso. Yep. Mike, you've seen all of Ted Lasso, but you've seen very little of Better Call Saul. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to be the last one then, because I have a feeling it's going to be a split here. So, Brian, why don't you start us? Ted Lasso or Saul?
I don't know. I think I'm going to have to give it. Okay, this is a testament.
If you vote for Ted and Mike votes for Saul, I'll be so freaking confused right now.
Well, I am going to give it to Ted, because just a testament to the fact that I've seen so little yet of Ted Lasso, and yet I have such a strong opinion that I voted for him every round against characters that I have seen, must show that, even with the stuff I haven't seen, even more so, like, this is such a dynamic character. And I think maybe the fact that he's not like in the cultural iconic sphere that Michael Scott is just because of time. Because Michael Scott has had 15 years to have people talk about him and have the DVDs and streaming and everything, whereas Ted Lasso is just too new. I mean, you go back to however long Ted Lasso's been on the air. When The Office was on the air for that long, people weren't talking about Michael Scott nearly as much as they are now. Does that mean 15 years from now, Ted Lasso is going to be the new Michael Scott as far as TV characters? Maybe. I don't know.
Blowing my mind right now. Blowing my mind, Brian. Mike, are you saying Ted?
I'm saying Ted, and I'm saving all my arguments for the next round.
Oh, man. It was Saul for me. Man, my Saul and Leslie duo at the end fell apart. Now I guess I just got to root for characters that I love. Ted Lasso versus Michael Scott.
That's how I felt when Paul picked Dwight and took him out of the final two where he rightfully belonged.
Both, I mean, these are both popular characters. I don't know. I didn't think through who was going to end up in the number one, but I actually am a little surprised at this duo. Mike, you now's your time. Give us your argument for Ted over Michael, because I think that's where you're going.
So now we're at the final round. Ted Lasso.
This is the championship that I wanted, and I did not think I would get, because I did not know that Brian would vote for Ted. This has blown my mind.
Way to go, Brian.
I kind of feel like Ted is the underdog that I was going to pick, and everyone was going to make fun of my bracket for. And between the two of them, I'm going to go with Ted. Ted is a character that you want to cheer for. Ted is also a character you want to be. Who doesn't watch Ted Lasso and think that you want to be more like Ted Lasso? Like Ted introducing characters and be like, congratulations, you just met an awesome person. Like, isn't that what you want to do in life when you meet characters or when you meet new people and you're introduced to new people? Ted is a character that when there's something going on, you feel for him so deeply. He's everything you want in a character. I love Michael Scott as much as the next Office fan, but I'm going to go with Ted.
Oh, this is so hard. For posterity's sake, the computer gave Ted the seed of 8 and Michael the seed of 23. So, that's what we're dealing with today. Oh my gosh. I don't know. Brian, I could give you power right now. I could pick Michael Scott, even though I didn't pick him. I truly don't know.
I'll point out that awards are mostly meaningless. Hence, Steve Carell never won an Emmy, which is a travesty.
That is.
But I will point out Ted Lasso has won an Emmy already. So you talked about cultural impact. I mean, Ted's there in the zeitgeist.
I think I am leaning towards Michael Scott. I love Ted. Ted is super rootable, and I think this violates some of my parameters I first set up because you know what? No, I just talked myself out of it. Ted's the winner. Ted gets it. Brian, you don't get to do this. What were you going to say, Brian?
I was going to pick Ted. Mike had me convinced. And just the fact of I just think that, Michael would have been deserving as well. Michael, like I said, everything I said, he is such a great character. But I kind of said my arguments in the last round, the fact that Ted has gotten so much acclaim so quickly.
Yeah. My biggest convincer was for Michael was the idea of what The Office became without him. So that is a huge boon to him. And I understand that's why he made it to number 2. But going back to my original idea that Ted is the guy that I root for. Ted is the person in real life. If I know him, dude, I'm whatever this guy is leading, I'm going to want to help him build whatever it is. He is just so likable. He is so easy to root for. And even in his own show, how he turns people, because he's in a situation where no one except for his assistant coach is on his side. When he first gets there, when we first meet him, no one's on his side. And he slowly is able to turn him around and to not lose that amazing positivity that he has. That is so amazing to watch. And it's something that people should actually emulate. There's a lot of things about Michael that we should not emulate. Yeah. But with Ted, there's a lot that is very easy to be like, I want to be like Ted.
I'm gonna say something controversial to something we've talked about all season, all episode, is that Yes, obviously the show did drop dramatically in quality when Michael left the show. However, I don't think that the last two seasons are a waste of time. I think there are a lot of great moments, and great episodes in the last season. Um, Even in the season with Robert California, there's some good ones in there because that show.
The Tallahassee storyline was really good.
Yeah, it was. Minus the whole Jim and Kathy thing, which was dumb, but everything else, I could get way more Vacation Stanley.
Yes.
Which brings
I get the conflict of Kathy though. I do get the conflict. I don't hate it as much.
Yeah. Because I mean, obviously you think of there Jim and Dwight and Pam and season 8 Andy, like the main the biggest characters outside of Michael. But even the other ones like Stanley, Kevin, Angela, all these characters, they bring so much to the show. And like that last okay, I will admit I am someone who gets like emotional and teary at the end of series finales of TV shows. Like that's me, because it's like this show that I've been watching for however long is ending, and knowing that in real life it's ending, it just kind of like that's what's going to get me to tear up is finales. And it definitely did it for me in the season finale or the series finale of The Office, when everyone without Michael is in the office, they're hanging out, and Creed starts playing that song, and just showing like Michael's not the only one in the show. Like all these other characters having their moment really did hold my attention. And even though Michael wasn't there, it wasn't like, oh, Michael's not there.
Yep. That amazing. If this has not convinced you to watch Ted Lasso by now, then I don't know what will. So make sure to check it out. If you've already watched it, then you know what we're talking about. I'm excited for season 3. Want to thank Mike for being on our episode today. Thank you guys for listening with us. We had a long one today. So we're going to jump into trivia, and we're going to say goodbye. So last week we had 2 trivia questions. We talked about going to Disney World, TV shows that went to Disney World. My trivia question was asking about which park opened shortly after the death of Walt Disney, and that was actually the Magic Kingdom. So Walt never saw Walt Disney World. He never got to see any of the parks in Florida actually come to fruition. I do love that when Magic Kingdom was opened, that someone went up to Roy, his brother, and was like, man, if only your brother could have seen this. And Roy said, well, he did see it. And I was like, that's speaks to the testament of the visionary that Walt was. And then Roy, he stepped into Walt's role to help make sure that his brother's park became a reality. And sadly, Roy died like the year after Magic Kingdom opened. It's like he put so much into this that he was finally able to rest after that. So there you go. There's a little bit of tidbit for Walt Disney. Brian, you had one from last week as well.
Yeah, mine is not nearly as emotional or poetic as that. Mine was simply in the episode, Disney World episode from Step by Step, the subplot where JT and Rich are trying to get with 2 girls. One of the girls looked familiar, and that's because that girl who just had a bit part in this episode was Joanna Garcia, who went on to be regular on Reba as the daughter Cheyenne. Plus, she was in movies and stuff too.
There you go. All right, Mike, what do you got for us? Trivia this week.
So both times I've been on with you guys, I brought up MASH, and I've been thinking about MASH today. Because I know you guys, we're not here to talk about politics, not here to talk about current events. But in light of current events, I mean, the world could always use more peace, and MASH is a show that promoted peace, that's not anti-military, but is anti-bureaucracy, anti-waste. And so I was thinking about MASH. So I have a fun MASH trivia question. Is what character was changed out after the pilot because the actor that ends up in the role botched his audition by ad-libbing some of the lines? So they cast a different actor. That actor did the pilot, did not go well, so they went back to the guy that they originally wanted for the role that had been disqualified because of his ad-libbing lines.
There you go. So is the question is who was the guy that came back?
We'll go with character. We'll go with character.
What
character got recast because the one of the pilot didn't hit, and the original guy, they went back to him.
There you go. All right. And then Brian, I just wanted to point out to you that Joanna, what was her name? Garcia. She played Ariel in Once Upon a Time.
Oh, she
did? Full circle of Disney for her.
There you go.
There you go. All right. Well, again, thank you, Mike, for being on. This was a lot of fun. Did not go the way I thought it would at all, but I also had no expectations, no idea where it was going to go. It was a lot of fun. I had a blast. So hopefully you did too. Until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
I'm Mike.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.